Hey Internet, it's your old friend Dominic here, aka the King of Hearts, with the All-American Casino Guide. And today we're going to be talking about some tips that you can use while playing Omaha. And it's important first is that if you haven't already watched our video on Omaha, the beginner's guide, it's probably best you open a new tab and you watch that video first. And while you're at it, check out the rest of the videos on our channel. It's full of tips, tricks, tutorials, and trivia all about casinos and casino games. So just to give you a quick refresher about the game of Omaha, it's played almost identically to Texas Hold'em, but the big difference between Texas Hold'em and Omaha is that instead of 2 hold cards, you're actually going to be dealt 4. And with each hand, you are required to take 2 cards from your whole hand and 3 from the community pool to form the 5-card hand that you use. Another important thing is that Omaha typically has a high-low structure where there is 2 hands in each game of Omaha. You have a high hand and a low hand. And so the pot is actually split into 2 respective pots and is paid out to whichever player has the low hand and whichever player has the high hand. Sometimes a player could actually have both. Sometimes it can be split pots. It's rather interesting. So now that you understand the basics of how Omaha differs from Texas Hold'em, I think it's now important that we go over these 3 little tips that you could use to help solidify your overall Omaha strategy. The first is knowing what 2 cards you want to play with and if those 2 cards are strong or weak and will help you win the various pots associated with Omaha. With beginners, I always recommend that you stick to the high pairs, suited connectors. So overall, the best hands that you can have in any game of Omaha would be something like this, where you have a pair of aces and a pair of kings. And as you notice, you have suited connectors. So ace, king, spades, ace, king, diamonds. This is probably one of the best possible hands you could hold. When it comes to your starting hand in Omaha, with beginners, I always recommend you want to stick with the high hands, high pairs, for example, suited connectors, or connectors that have high values like Jack Queen, for example. So like something like this would be a great hand where you see you have 2 aces and 2 kings, and those happen to be ace, king, spade, ace, diamond, ace, king, diamond. So that's a pretty good hand right there. On the subject of aces, though, that brings me to my second point, which is a pair of aces is not nearly as devastating in the game of Omaha as it is in Texas Hold'em. The reason for that is that it becomes increasingly difficult to improve on that hand, because when you already have a pair of aces in your hold, you have to take 3 cards from the community pool. So you're essentially hoping for the possibility of another ace being dealt. That's the only way you're going to actually improve on those 2 cards. You're required to take 2, so you're kind of stuck with whatever you got. Speaking of aces, that brings me to my second point, which is don't overvalue certain hands, specifically aces. In the game of Texas Hold'em, aces are very valuable and are rarely beaten. Some people will argue that aces are nothing really. They're just an opening hand. It's a good opening hand, but it's not an automatic bid that you're going to win. In Omaha, it's not nearly as a strong opening hand as it is in Texas Hold'em. Overall, the only way to improve 2 aces is to have been drawn 3 of a kind in the flop, so that way you can get a full house. The other possibility is, of course, if a 3rd or 4th ace gets dealt in the community pool, so those community cards could help you get 4 of a kind. But 4 of a kind is good no matter what it is. It doesn't really matter if it's aces or not. It just happens that 4 aces is a pretty damn good hand. So be mindful that hands are going to change dramatically from one hand to the next as far as what you're getting, and it's going to change as you see the flop, the turn, the river. You have to be mindful of how these things are developing as they're developing in order to develop a good betting strategy that works for you. Now, brings me to my third and final piece of advice today, which is when you're starting off in Omaha, try to play with people that are of an equal skill level than yourself, or even potentially lower skill level, because it's going to take a while if you're transitioning from Texas Hold'em to Omaha for you to fully embrace the game, because it doesn't have the same mathematical analysis, and the betting strategies are dramatically different. And depending on if you're playing pot limit or no limit Omaha, that's going to have a bearing on it. So try to stick around players that you can read rather well, so that you can exploit their weaknesses. That's we said pretty much for any game of poker for that matter, but specifically in Omaha, it's such a weird game, and so many people seemingly are unfamiliar with the game or are not comfortable with it yet, that you can take advantage of their relative inexperience and capitalize on that. So if you see certain players playing weak hands, or certain players chasing bad options for straights or flushes, making a lot of gut checks, these are all things that you can be mindful for. So if you have a situation where you can read the other players, that's even better. In many ways, I prefer playing Omaha live versus playing Omaha online for this matter, because it's such a game that you get so many more televised tells from players, in my experience anyway. I've noticed that players tend to telegraph, especially in the way they look at their cards or the way they move their cards around. If you're really observant, you might get a lot of very good information. Inexperienced players will fiddle with their cards on the table, and how they arrange the cards and how they look over at the table. They're having to keep track of more things in their head than they would normally with a game of Texas Hold'em. So sometimes they use this fidgeting card action as a way to keep the potential rankings straight in their heads. So be mindful of that, and we'll be talking about reading tells in other videos in the near future. So that completes this very brief 3-tip introduction into tips for Omaha. Guys, as I said before, please check out the rest of the channel, because we have a ton of other videos on Omaha, Texas Hold'em, and other table games like blackjack. Go ahead and leave a comment down below if you found anything here interesting, or if there's anything else that you'd like to add that I might have skipped over. Perhaps you even have some piece of advice you could add to the rest of the channel. Make sure to click that like button if you enjoyed what you saw today. Hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring that bell, because it's the only way you're going to be positive that you're going to get all notifications of new episodes as they become available. My name's Dominic. This is the All-American Casino Guide, reminding you, play responsibly.